one of the founding subdisciplines of exercise sciences is nutrition. And you guys take one nutrition course. It's called Fundamentals of Nutrition. Nutrition 201 is the course number. And they don't exactly organize it this exact same way, but I teach nutrition also at the upper division level, and I like to organize nutrition in a five compartment model. They do cover all of these topics, but they don't cover them exactly in this systematic approach. And the reason I like to teach nutrition in a systems model is because that's exactly what the human body is. We take in nutrition and we have needs for those that are driven by biology and psychology. We process those foods that we consume or the sources, and then they all yield functions. So all the nutrients have functions, and then there are these measures that we can, assess and determine someone's nutrition status. So, and we'll get to all of these. In fact, that's how I organized the sample lesson for your nutrition course, is to look at each of these five components. Before we move on, I want to mention that there are lots more slides, perhaps than what you have in the notes, but that's just to provide you a full picture of what you're going to learn in the class. What's on the learning or the lesson notes are what you can expect and what you can focus in on for the test. But I think for the betterment of the big picture of learning, it's best to include more detail than less. So we're going to start with nutrient needs. And these are the biological and psychological factors that drive our nutrient intake. So nutrient needs and nutrient intake are ideally balanced, right? And these are typically ran very biologically by hormones and by what we like to call like a gas and brake pedal system. So there they are. I'm like, where's the rest of those pieces? So the stomach is an endocrine hormone, an endocrine gland. Also, even though the stomach cannot digest, it secretes a hormone called ghrelin. And that is when we are hungry. We feel the rumble. All of a sudden our brain is told it is time to eat, says the stomach. Fat tissue is also endocrine in nature in that it secretes hormones, but it secretes a hormone called leptin. And leptin works as a counter-regulatory or in opposition of an opposite regulatory hormone of ghrelin. And it tells you when, whoa, we are getting at max capacity at storing energy, stop eating. And so these systems naturally regulate our eating. And you may not realize that that's the hormonal process when you're like, ugh, I don't want another bite, but that's it. And also why sometimes you're not even hungry, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere you smell food and you're just, whoa, your brain kicked in. So these signals are regulated biologically, neurohormonally. Now, just giving you an idea of how much we eat per day, we eat about 300 to 400 grams of macronutrients. We eat about only 10 grams or less of micronutrients, which is a very small amount. And altogether, we eat a couple pounds of food per day. So you can imagine that the rest of that is water. So 300 to 400 grams, which is about the size of a Vans shoe. So guidelines for nutrition intake have already been developed. So we know how many nutrients we need. And those are published in these nice friendly dietary guidelines, which you've probably heard of, but maybe not. And then something official that we use in the profession called the DRI, Dietary Reference Intake. Now, I'm presenting the types of values that come with the EAR because they're different, and it's important for you to understand the more and less reliable ones and the ones that we're seeing in our food packages and on the guidelines that we regularly see. So the EAR was based on scientific research, experimental research where, they collected things, they did sample analysis and asked, fed certain protocols for diets. So these are based on experimental research. The RDA are basically the EARs, but they round it up to play it safe and cover a broader population, average. So if they found the EAR, for instance, was 10 grams per day, then the RDA went up to 13 because it wanted to cover that extra standard deviation to cover more people. So the RDA and the EAR are one and the same, but the RDA is higher. Now, we know the RDA because this is what we see on our food packages. So if it says 10% of the daily value for a particular nutrient, that's coming from the RDA, 10% of the RDA. Now the adequate intake or the AI is another value in the report, and it's not as reliable. So it's not that we don't use them in the field, it gives us an idea, but it's that we just determined it based on healthy people's and surveys. So people we'd send out a survey. Oh, great, you have generally healthy body weight, generally healthy blood profile levels, and you eat generally about this much fat or calcium or etc. So not as reliable, but still the amount eaten by generally healthy populations, which means something. The AMDR is a very well-known value because it's where we hear about how much carbohydrate, fat, and protein we get. And it sounds complicated, but you're looking at it right here. It's the distribution of carb calories, fat calories, and protein calories. And this part is important because you guys are interested in sports diets and sports nutrition, and talk about a pretty big misconception is protein intake. So fat and carbohydrate intake are our fuel. So the more fuel we're expending, the more fuel we're going to need to consume. But protein are our structural compounds. It's like our structure, and we're going to talk about this in nutrition functions. I'm digressing, but it's not fuel. So even though we need more, we can kind of go with the basic RDA guideline. So the RDA is 56 grams per day, and that is based off this little amount. And I'm showing you this for a good reason, not to give you detail headaches, but the 56 grams per day for males in their peak, which is the biggest, protein expending group, which is why I picked them. But that's based on a value of 0.8 grams per day. Okay. So that's even when we're training. If you look at this training diet for bodybuilders, endurance people, and just regular average people, in the case where protein was at 1.7, 1.06 for bodybuilders, let's look at the 1.06 because it's lowest. So they had 1.06 instead of 0.8. So it's above the amount that's recommended by the RDA. But if you look at their protein balance, which is a measure in their urine, which tells us if they were in excess protein or balanced, and you can see that they were in a positive protein balance, meaning that they were still excreting out excess nitrogen. So even bodybuilders who, yes, they ate more protein, and I'll go back to that because they had to have 1,000 more calories, and the distribution of calories are still the same across those three groups. So yes, they had more protein grams, but in terms of per unit of body weight, even at the lightly amounts above the RDA, even bodybuilders, they were still high in the net nitrogen balance. So going back to the point of this and being so in detail is because I wanted to expand a little bit on the nutrition. And the nutrition lesson here is that we know our values, we get these guidelines, we see them, we've heard about how much of these nutrients to have, and this is kind of dispelling, we don't really need a lot more protein in terms of bodybuilding and working out, is we just keep it in the same proportion with our added calorie intake. So we also have behavioral nutrient needs, and this topic is huge. I will say we do not have any courses on eating psychology or eating disorders, which is a bummer. We used to, but we expanded a lot of areas of food science because we have a pretty healthy food science industry in San Diego, and it was an interest of students. And so long story short, we phased out those parts of our curriculum. But boy, is nutrition a psychology game, because we all have different preferences, background, cultures, values, literacy of what we know about nutrition. We care about different things like free trade or sustainability or animal welfare. So personal choices really do shape our nutrition intake. Also on the psychological or behavioral end of the scale are the environmental controls, the things like marketing and policies and access to healthy foods, promotions. Like, we've seen these things, you guys, and these things affect how we eat. It affects our nutrition. And again, you'll learn about some of this in Intro Nutrition 201, but more really as just a consumer of this information, not somebody understanding where it fits into nutrition as a discipline. So now we're moving on to food. So we consume food every day to meet our nutrient needs. Again, I've mentioned this, but about 2 to 5 pounds, which is a stack of hard books, about 4 or 5 textbooks. Whole foods, that's a big source of nutrition in our diet. And of those, we have plants and animals that have been processed a number of ways. Sometimes we just eat them whole, like a banana or a chicken breast. And sometimes we have them very processed, like apple juice, or beef jerky, right? So we eat them on a spectrum of processing. So whole fruits, where there are many different varieties, and I won't go into the botanical classifications of them, but again, we clean, peel, cut, can, freeze, dry, and do a whole variety of things to them to create fruit products. And those fruit products also count in our daily food servings. And so every day we should be shooting for about 2 to 3 cups of fruit, and these count in there. However, whole fruit should be the most of your fruit choices because they have more fiber. Every step of processing, the fiber is reduced. Vegetables. So vegetables, I love the name vegetables because you never think of like why things are named what they're named. Well, maybe you do, but vegetables are named after the like seed bearing or the non-reproductive part of the plant, or the vegetative part. Get it? Like, duh, it just sits there. So vegetables, the vegetative or non-reproductive parts of plants. And just like fruits, these are processed. The more they're processed, the more nutrients are lost, but we buy them in many forms, from raw all the way to, potato chips and powderized vegetable chips, which, by the way, potatoes are vegetables too. So those are technically also veggie chips. But anyway, veggie straws are a good example. Let's see. Oh, I wanted this potato to zoom in because this is a sign for like technology. We are advancing. Did I already tell you guys about acrylamide? Well, there's potatoes out by this company called Simplot that developed a potato that produces less acrylamide when fried. And they actually have been trying to get McDonald's to use this potato for a long time. And it's not really a cost inhibitive issue. It's that McDonald's is just nervous about using biotech potatoes. So again, I always love talking about the food science, the biotech. We're so afraid of it. But it's funny because, like we talked about with the cow's milk, it's part of our diet anyway, but we could be getting less carcinogens in our fried food. But anywho, grains. So grains are, I think, when I was learning about nutrition, I thought they were so confusing because, how is oatmeal the same thing as bread, the same thing as rice? But it all starts the same. It all grows in a big grass, and they take little seeds out of the grass, and those seeds are the basis for everything. So we either eat the seed the way it came out, like rice, or we eat the seed maybe crushed flat, like oats, or we eat the seed after it's been completely pulverized into a flour, right? And so usually the flours we eat have this bran layer or outer layer taken off, which is where all the fiber and minerals are. So that's a bummer. We're going to talk more about whole fibers in a second. We also get plant proteins, and these are a great food group. These are the food group that are most important if you're vegan, because this is where you're getting all your protein from. So this is a big group. There's a lot of different varieties, and if you're like, wait a minute, isn't that a nut? Oh wait, no, this is the nuts included. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. This is that slide. I have another slide for this class that goes into more detail, but legumes, kind of interestingly, peanuts are legumes. The only thing that makes a legume is that it is into like multiple ones in these little capsules. So lots in one capsule where seeds grow. Lots of seeds in one little pericarp is called a legume. And so nuts, even though it's got that hard woody exterior like nuts, because there's two in there, it's technically a legume. So anyway, fun facts. But one of the food groups is these. This should be the majority of our protein intake. It's not, but it should be 2/3, and it's more around 1/3. Brings up meat. So we also eat animals, and we eat the flesh and we eat the organs, and we eat the connective tissues and all of it, and the juices. We eat the sarcoplasm, and you should remember that from the exercise physiology lecture. We also eat the sarcoplasm, or the juices within those cells. So we eat meat in a number of processed and whole varieties. We also have milk, which is produced from the mammary glands of lactating female mammals. And I don't know why I put female in there, because only females can lactate, so that was kind of a special detail. But we drink lots of milks, and we're not right now talking about plant milks, which we'll talk about in a few minutes on processed foods. Right now we're on whole foods. But yeah, lots of different products made from just milk. Well, not lots. Yogurt and cheese. That's pretty much it. And butter. But we're not talking about butter here, because butter is not technically in the milk group. Insects and organisms. A lot of detail. Probably shouldn't have included this one, but I think it's interesting because insect-derived products like honey are very popular. Honey is actually so gross, even though it's delicious. It's like bees throw up. So it's basically they enzymatically digest glucose and other carbohydrates from the plants that they eat, and that's what they make honey with. But also the reason I wanted to keep it is because edible insects are really, honestly, gaining a lot of traction, and even in the U.S. I know they're popular in other nations, but they haven't been popular here. But they're such a good protein source, and if you put them into flour, just like grains, hey, now we're talking. So we also eat processed and formulated foods in addition to whole foods. Things like sweeteners, fats and oils. I definitely have to move this up. But fats and oils from plants, which are usually liquid, or solid kind from animals like butter, only because I already promised I'd bring that up again. We take from those grains that we brought up earlier. We take that seed and like corn also, and we take out all of the starch and we make different things to bake with. We also use a lot of whole foods to make functional additives. For instance, I know you're like, why is that up there? Why is egg an additive? Well, we take a compound out of it called lecithin that you'll find in almost every single sauce or dressing because it's a texturizer. What's another one? We're well used to cocoa bean stimulants, but what's another one? Broths and things like that. We also, as part of our processed foods, drink lots of bottled beverages, and those include soft drinks, juices, and alcohol. Big area. I'd say these are probably most of the grocery store aisles. This is your bread, your pasta, your ready-to-eat cereal, and all your baked snacks. Huge group, because that's what we have made it. Because it's convenient, it's shelf stable, it sits there, you can take it with you, it's portable, it's dry, and usually it tastes really good, especially this category. So yeah, big processed grains are a problem for us. We should be eating whole grains, but we just love these ones so much more. So if we are going to eat lots of processed grains, it's always best to choose whole varieties, and those are made with flours that also still include that bran layer. The only advantage to a lot of enriched flours is that since we already stripped all the nutrients and ripped them naked from those whole grain little seeds, the government regulates adding them back. And so at least all of those nutrients have been enriched back into those processed flours. So that is one benefit. Same with milk, if I didn't mention. The government requires companies to add those nutrients to milk also, specifically vitamin A and D. We also take in dietary supplements, but we're not going to talk about those. We've been talking about those a lot, but they are not regulated by the FDA. And we also consume meals that can be made from raw ingredients, that can be made from partially processed ingredients, or that can be purchased hot and ready to eat. Clearly, they become less nutritious and less good as we go down this spectrum. Only usually, not always are they less nutritious, but they usually have a lot more added fat and salt at this level and this level. Woo! That was a lot. Sorry. I am definitely, you guys are probably tripping out, but again, stick with the learning notes. I wanted you guys to know about maybe the food groups. I honestly don't even remember what I wrote, but now you have it. So nutrient processing. I'm really breaking this down into 3 major nutrient processing systems. So I'm breaking this down into 3 nutrient processing systems, starting with digestion and absorption. So our gastrointestinal tract is made up of a long canal, and you've seen this before, but very importantly, it's lined with absorptive cells, nerve cells that make things move along, and smooth muscle cells that contract, also making things move along. It consists of the mouth, which has teeth for mechanical breaking down of food. And if I didn't already tell you this, the jaw muscle for chewing is crazy. It's the craziest muscle ever in our body. It can close in the molar area with 200 pounds of force. So anyway, the mouth is a major site of nutrient digestion because we're breaking it down there and chemically digesting it with enzymes. The esophagus, foods moved down through the esophagus, and very importantly, it closes with this flap. And if that flap loses its integrity, the acid backflows into the esophagus, a situation called acid reflux or GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. You guys probably don't have it, but you might when you get pregnant, even though you're young, and you might know a parent who has it. That's what Tums are for. The stomach is basically like I mentioned at one point at one of these lectures, but it's like battery acid level of acidity. It's a pH of about 2, and that's due to its hydrochloric acid, which is technically set up to dissolve food. It's regulated by hormones that basically have it secrete juices and stimulate and move things along. The small intestine is where the food moves next, and this is the primary absorption site. One interesting thing, without going through all these details, is that the pancreas secretes bicarbonate as the food is entering from the stomach. Otherwise, we would rip our stomach apart with the acids that are coming through from the stomach. So this bicarbonate comes in and it creates a really, really low pH environment, so the acid comes right on in and it isn't affecting our lining. I think I'm gonna skip past all that, but on the next slide, so they come in, this is just a picture of a cross section of the intestinal tract, lots of surface area for absorption, comes through this enterocyte or the cell of the small intestine, in through the brush border, and then they're packaged and absorbed into the blood. There are lots of different ways that we absorb. Some of them go right through the cell with no assistance whatsoever. And some are requiring more things. Like this one needs a carrier here at the cell membrane. This one needs energy. This one actually happens through salt attraction and through ion attraction. So osmosis, where nutrients are coming through based on their attraction. And then there's simple diffusion, which I forgot to mention, but I think that was, was that this one? That was that one, simple diffusion. They just come on in. And paracellular absorption, that didn't translate or animate in very well either, but technically paracellular and transcellular absorption is where it goes between the cells. So that was a little off alignment there. This is important too for nutrient absorption, not just overly detailing you, but this is the subject and why this stuff's important. Fats are insoluble, so they can't go into our blood. Our blood has too much water, so they go into the lymph system when they're absorbed because they're too non-water soluble. The rest of the nutrients go straight into the hepatic route, which touches the liver first and then straight to the heart. I'll touch on the large intestine. So from there, very few nutrients are left. All that you have is insoluble fibers, a little bit of extra nutrients, and a lot of water. We produce I'm not even going to say, but let's just call it 10 gallons. That's just made up, but lots. I think probably 5 is more realistic, but 5 to 10 gallons. We're churning out the water and we reabsorb most of that back in the large intestine. But when it's coming in, it's just pure like a soup. It's totally liquidy. So you've got some insoluble fiber, lots of water. And what happens in the large intestine is the germs that live there, or no one will call them germs. I think the germs are when they're gross. The microflora, the really healthy bacteria that live there, they ferment all of those insoluble fibers and the things that we didn't digest, and they create their own energy with those, and they produce these really stinky byproducts that come out as poop. So really all poop is whatever they didn't digest, a little bit of them, and the stinky byproducts that they make. Another little interesting fact, I told you that lots of water comes in, and then the large intestine, what its primary job is to reabsorb all of that water back into the body. And so if it doesn't absorb enough, that's when you've got watery poop or diarrhea. If it absorbs too much, that's when your poop is hard like little rocks, right? So you want it to absorb the right amount. When your poop is not large, but like a nice size, and it's one piece, that's when your large intestine is dialed in doing a perfect job. And it doesn't always do a perfect job because it depends what you eat, etc. I'm going to go into too much detail there. If you're interested in why what you eat could cause you to have constipation or diarrhea based on the large intestine's ability, let me know. It's another 3-minute spiel. Nutrient transport and homeostasis. So the nutrients now are in. They've come in through the intestines. They have soaked now over the capillary bed into the blood. I mentioned that they come, if they're fats, they're coming from the lymph. If they're not, they're coming from the regular hepatic route. Then they're all pumped out to general circulation. They're directed where they need to go by our super smart vessels that direct the blood, and the blood carries the nutrients. And I just thought it's interesting because look how small of a percentage is like our blood, the weight and size. By the way, we have about 1.5 liters of blood in our body. So it's about 1.5 gallons of milk. 5 liters, 1.5 gallons of milk. That's about how much blood we have. And of that, only 2% is nutrients. So very small amount and very tightly regulated. We don't really store a lot of nutrients in the blood. We transport them to travel them around where they're going to be used or stored. Like got to get into the brain constantly, which is probably why that 2% even exists to begin with. So now what's happened, because like I just mentioned, man, we just ate a lot more than that. Like, how are we going to get rid of it? So immediately we have all kinds of exchange things happening where we got to get that I just said shit. That we have to get the nutrients out of the blood. So in that instance, the endocrine system, or the sensor is in the brain also, it signals, where'd all my little glands and hormones go? I don't know what happened there, but I'm going to skip this slide because the glands would be right here. The brain stimulates that, tells the pancreas, oh my God, release the insulin. Then the insulin goes, and then the cells take up the sugar, and guess what happens? Blood sugar levels drop again. So they went up from the meal, there's a response happened, and then they hit homeostasis. Then after some time, they drop again, and then we have to eat, and then the whole process repeats itself. So it really is a stop and go, just like hunger. Now, Oh, I love when that happens. Even though there's like great gifts now and these aren't that exciting anymore, I still love it. So what just happened? The nutrients were just exchanged. Whether they were coming in and out, it happened because the nutrient levels in the blood were too high, hormones were released, and now the hormone goes and binds. Oh, I thought I had that hormone too. This is the hormone. It comes over here and binds here to the receptor, and that causes an intracellular signaling. And you're like, again, too much detail, but no, it's important for the adaptations that happen in exercise physiology, because this right here, this signaling thing, it's GLUT4 and all of those reactions. So for us to even this to come up to the cell, oops, I'm mad my animations aren't here. This comes up to the cell to grab the nutrients in. And so one of the adaptations to exercise is that we get more of these intracellular communicators and transporters. So long story short, hormone comes up, binds to receptor, that facilitates this whole reaction that allows nutrients to come in and out. Now, once they're in and out, what do we do with them? We metabolize them. So we're either taking them out and building them into something, or we're taking them from something built and breaking them down. That's what metabolism is. It goes both ways. Now, the reason that we have to talk about nutrient turnover first is because look at these cells turn over so fast. So this will make more sense knowing this, because otherwise this might not make as much sense. But the small intestine, I mean, you're realigning your small intestine. 2 to 4 days, these cells are turning over. Stomach cells, and it makes sense. These are highly nutty environment cells. Some cells, some cells last a lifetime, like nerve cells and eyeball cells. But look how fast blood nutri cells, which are immune system cells, they're days that we're producing them constantly. And that happens, guys, through nutrient turnover. The turnover, we get them from our diet, they're free in our cells, and then we build them into structures and we break those structures down. We get more in the diet, we have them free there's just this constant cycle. And that's what metabolism is, the building them, the breaking them down, building them, breaking them down. So let's start with building first. Building is called anabolism. The nutrients have just come in the cell. It is a building time. We got insulin is in the house, right? Or we just worked out, or we're growing, and growth hormones are in the house, right? So that's where the target is. The target is where we're storing the nutrients and the cells that are constantly turning over. I just said the cells of the large and small intestine turn over every few days. That's where a lot of the nutrients are going. Right here, this may not look that clear in the picture, but it's bone marrow. That's where the immune cells are made. Boy, that is a target for those nutrients. Also, they don't need a lot of fats to do those nutrient turnover jobs. So a lot of them go to storing depots too, like the fat tissue. So long story short, the cells get the nutrients, they put them through these pathways where they build tissue mass and an energy reservoir. Now, oh, I remember why. I was like, why? I know why I put the spleen on here, because it stores iron, but I was confused for a second because it's not energy. And I was like, why is the spleen there? Next slide. You know what? I do look over these, but I just forget because there's so many. But the spleen is a nutrient storing target, and not, carbs, fat, and protein like we typically think, but it stores iron. It recycles it, it stores it. It's our iron processing center. So a little prelude to not only regular nutrition, but life cycle nutrition, is the topic of infant nutrition. I love this topic, and of course every life stage has something you're interested in, but having a baby and buying like the cereal and wondering why the heck it's iron fortified, I'm like, why iron of all the things? And I did not know this when I had babies. Even though I studied nutrition, I had a master's degree in nutrition, I really genuinely did not realize why every single bit of rice cereal and really grains were fortified with iron. And that's because when you're born, your spleen is stored up with 6 months worth of iron. So it's incredible. You don't need iron. The mom's milk doesn't have any iron in it. I mean, you would taste it. There is no iron in the breast milk. The baby has all the iron it needs. So at 6 months though, those stores deplete. So if baby's still only drinking mom's breast milk, guess what nutrient it now needs? Iron. It's the only one. Let's see. Okay, so now we're talking about anabolism. We're talking about building. I just went on a little sidekick about why infant cereals are fortified with iron. Now we're looking at anabolism, but specifically here in the muscle cell. And I've brought this up a million times, muscle protein synthesis, but I didn't want to go into too much detail last time, but we just ate, right? All the nutrients are out here. All the free nutrients are out here. We just ate, so insulin is there because the carbohydrates triggered its release. say in the case we just worked out, that triggered insulin growth factor, which is the growth hormone we just mentioned. All these reactions coming together and the presence of leucine, an amino acid, boom, we're getting new proteins developed. And again, I am going to cover this in more detail in the exercise physiology lecture, and we'll bring this up again when we talk about a fictitious research study in part 3, because we're going to look at what effect of being a vegan has on this process, right? When these are the constituents of protein foods. So I digress, but anabolism. The other part of metabolism is catabolism. So anabolism is building, catabolism is breaking down or biodegrading. And this is literally just in reverse. So the nutrients need to be released from these cells that we're storing them. And also sometimes in the case when we're fasting and we've gone a long time without food, and not even really a long time, let's call it 15 hours, we start breaking down our own tissues, especially these high turnover ones like the gut. I just mentioned those cells turn over a lot and they're toxic cells, so we will break those down when we need protein like that. Now, you should be asking yourself, why would we break down our tissues in 15 hours if we have so much stored fat? I mean, fat is, we probably have 50,000 fat calories stored on us. Why are we breaking down tissue when we need energy? And it's not because we need the energy, it's because we need the nitrogen. So again, protein is not our fuel. Protein provides the nitrogen for our building blocks. Fat and carbs are our fuel. So when we don't eat for 15 to 20 hours, we start degrading tissues, not for energy really, but for nitrogen. Now we can say that we do it for energy because that's what we haven't eaten, but we don't really need energy. We have so much of it stored. So that's the way that we break nutrients down, and from where. So now let's talk about nutrient functions. We ate them, we digested them, we absorbed them. Now what is all of this for? What are the things that we use nutrients for? Well, like I've mentioned, nutrients are essentially comprising the cell. We've got fat is about 16% and water is a huge percentage. Minerals a very small percentage. Stored glycogen is only about 1%, but this is because only muscle cells store it. Whereas every cell is lined with fat. Every cell contains intracellular proteins. Also, nutrients come together to make our structured tissues, which I'm not going to go into detail again. But also we use nutrients for energy. So when we consume nutrients, they consume these little units of carbon and acetyl-CoA that when the bonds are broken, recycle ATP. So it just fell apart and then basically it is just recycled. I don't know if I have that animated. There it is. The energy that we get from food goes to recycling and putting that P back on. Now, what's interesting though is we only use about 25% of the energy that we eat for that. The other 75% of the energy that we eat comes off as heat. So we really are, that's why we're called warm-blooded animals, but it is a trip how much heat we generate. That's why I always refer to us like Dr. Buono taught me, and you'll meet him in the section on research, but we're like Chevys. We run, honestly, the hottest engine of any mammal. We also use that energy. So this is the question, and I've mentioned this before too, but repetition is key because this is the basis of movement. So when the ATP releases energy, our cell uses that energy that it releases to do kinetic work. And when I say kinetic work, that should be confusing, but it shouldn't really, because your major is kinesiology. So it's the same thing, but it's looking at cell level movement, kinetic energy. So it uses it to build, like literally build. It uses it to pump stuff in and out of the cell. And it uses it to generate action potential, which is technically the biggest user of our ATP in a day. Now, we also store nutrients, and this is a big deal because even though it doesn't seem like a high utility thing, it's what allows us to not eat 24/7. And there are lots of species that have to eat every couple hours, and including the American pygmy, which, fact for fun, this animal has to eat every single hour because that's how it doesn't store any nutrients. So it literally is constantly eating animal. And lots of ocean animals are the same way too. So we are privileged and we aren't the best. There are certain other animals that store, for instance, a hibernating bear. They can store a month's worth of food. So we're not the best at it, but we do enjoy the luxury of sleeping and not eating every second. So moving along a little faster, nutrient operation. So another thing that nutrients do for us, they don't just provide us energy and structure, they literally facilitate reactions in our body. Number one being gene expression. So all day long, we're pumping out new cells like we've just been talking about. Well, those orders are coming from genes. The genes are what's coming and telling the cells, hey cell, time to make some new proteins, let's go, let's go. The genes are giving the orders and the commands. So nutrients actually influence those genetic expressions. For instance, vitamin D and calcium intake. When you eat more or an appropriate amount of vitamin D, it actually stimulates more of the receptors that we need to absorb calcium. What you're looking at right here is calcium absorption. This is calcium, the mineral. It's coming in through a receptor here. It has to bind to this thing here. Oops. And then it has to go through another gateway or receptor here to get into the bloodstream. That is a lot. And all three of these things, both these receptors at the surface and basolateral membrane and this little cell carrier, the expression for all three of those, or two things, these are the same receptor, the expression for those are based on vitamin D intake. You have more vitamin D, you express more of these, you're able to absorb calcium more effectively. If you don't eat vitamin D or you're not in a hormonal stage to absorb calcium, then you produce less of these. But again, it's mediated through vitamin D. Vitamin D affects the expression of these transporters, and the less of these that you have, the less calcium you get in. The more you have, the more calcium you get in. So that's just one example. Nutrients very much affect genetics, which is why the area blossoming, I know we're not nutrition majors, but the blossoming area is nutrigenomics, which is how diet affects gene expression, which is what I just explained, and the other way around, how gene expression affects our diet. So the things that we eat based on what happened to us in utero, right? What our genes are and what our food preferences are based on maternal diet. Big areas. Okay, I have to skip that. So nutrients not only do what did I call it? Operational or catalytic roles, not only in gene expression, but also in activating enzymes and action potential. You're probably like, wait, what? But nutrients, when I talk about the electrical signaling and it comes down and it meets at the muscle fiber, well, calcium is one of the major ions or electrochemical signals that are sent. So the neurotransmitters released, but they would do nothing without the action of calcium because calcium gives them access. So we would be firing our action potential too often and too sporadically if calcium wasn't there to regulate it. So calcium's there right with those neurotransmitters to regulate their entry into the fiber. And so calcium, yes, nutrients are even needed to generate action potential. Also for enzymes, and this is what topic I'll just take to the next slide, but for instance, B vitamins. If you've ever seen a B complex, it's because all the B vitamins, B1, B2, B3, and if you ever wondered where B4 was, the phantom numbers, those were like erroneously discovered where someone was like, oh shit, that doesn't fit the other characteristics of B vitamins, so they took it out, but after it was already named B4. But anyway, long fun fact story. But basically each of these nutrients is a coenzyme, and I know you probably don't recognize, but these are our pathways. Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, we've probably mentioned them, but if not, it doesn't matter. All of the different ways that we use nutrients for energy, the B vitamins all play a critical role in those. So yeah, you're going to buy a B vitamin and it's going to tell you what? That it's going to give you energy because these are our energy cycles. I think I have one more. Oh, I think I saved vitamin C for feedback. So also nutrients protect us. Nutrients are the basis for our immune cells. Nutrients are literally essential to keep inflammation down. For example, vitamin C. Vitamin C is an antioxidant. An oxidant is like fire. We produce oxidants naturally, but dude, they ruin our cells. They're like little fires running around. And the only thing that keeps us good on those is that we run around with vitamin C in the cell and take the fire extinguisher and put them out. So lots of nutrients, not just vitamin C. And I will not introduce the topic of phytochemicals, but phytochemicals in our foods that aren't technically nutrients, but they're newly discovered. They're not needed, but they're helpful. Lots of those are also antioxidants. So the more you eat of them, the more they're running around extinguishing inflammation, which is why phytochemicals are so important for disease prevention and inflammation. And lastly, on the protective functions of nutrients, they block. And so this one's easy to understand. Literally in your intestines, in your large intestines, all of the fibers and the nutrients that block the intestinal walls physically blockade super fast absorption of sugar so that your glycemic index isn't too high. It blocks the absorption of cholesterol to keep our blood cholesterol levels reasonable. It blocks pathogens from coming through. So lots of actual blocking roles from some of the nutrients. Then who knows if they were meant to serve that purpose, but by the intricacies, I'm sure they were by design meant to physically block things from being absorbed. And the last component is status. So these are nutrition assessment things, and this is what a dietitian does mostly. So a dietitian might help you shop and pick out food. They might help you figure out your psychological issues with eating. They might look at your digestive system. They might tell you what functions nutrients have, but the world of being a dietitian is centered on measuring someone's nutrition status, taking their assessments and telling them if they're good or not based on their nutrition intake. Now, we see nutrient deficiencies where people don't eat enough, and we see nutrient toxicities where people get too much. And we really only see upper intake level, which is one of more of those features in the DRI report, which is what I first talked about. This is another issue where they're like, whoa, at this level, guys, bad things happen. You flush, you turn red, your pee burns, whatever it is. So there's not an upper level intake for a lot of nutrients because it just doesn't happen very often. But one thing that we're really toxic with is sodium. So there is an upper level intake for sodium because, man, we just get way too much of it. Now, as a dietitian, you'll look at someone and you'll ask them questions about their nutrient intake, and you'll be able to see if they're, basically if they're having a deficiency or a toxicity. Say they come in and they're complaining about headaches, or their body weight is too big, or they're low energy. Now you're doing nutrition assessments. You're taking anthropometric measurements like their height and their weight, and you're figuring out their BMI. Maybe you're looking at their body fat mass. Maybe you're looking at their lean mass. Like, for instance, we most typically associate nutrition status with fat mass because we're like, whoa, you need to go on a diet and cut calories. But also for older folks, dude, measuring their anthropometric status, like their muscle mass, is a huge indicator of their health. People that have more muscle mass live longer. Biochemical measures, they'll take blood and they'll be like, man, you got way too much cholesterol or way too much sugar in your blood. Or they might look in your urine to say, whoa, your kidneys aren't working right. You're not filtering right. Or, whoa, you have way too much protein in your urine. So they can look at your biochemical measures in your body and make determinations. They can also take clinical measures like, I'm seeing you, I'm observing you, I'm giving you a physical. For instance, if your hair changes and your hair falls out, or your nail beds do certain things, or your eye colors do a certain things, dietitians can train it to, they're trained to be able to tell. For instance, eating disorders, there's extra hair growth on chin, chest, and that's small, but that's something a dietitian would be able to recognize. Or if someone's complaining of a lot of mouth ulcers, which brings me to my last point, they might ask them about their nutrition. Are they getting enough vitamin C? Are they getting enough B12? This is, for instance, I'm explaining again here, I'm reminding you of the catalytic roles of nutrients, and specifically vitamins. Vitamins activate enzymes. The enzyme that we need to make collagen, which is for all of our gums and our skin and our hair and our connective tissues like our joints, all of the collagen in our body, which I think collagen is definitely the number one protein in our body. It's like the most abundant. It's all made with this enzyme that is only activated by vitamin C. And so if you do not have vitamin C in your diet, you are unable to make collagen. And so your tissues will quickly disintegrate. So it's amazing how much vitamin C we get. It's just in everything. It's in all the fruits and vegetables, and it's just a highly accessible nutrient to us. So it's not like ever a huge deal. But in certain situations and populations, there are cases where it becomes deficient, like on boats. I think that is it. This just kind of wraps up the systems model, looking at, say someone habitually snacks, their input is too big on calories, they have an increase in fat synthesis, so they have more fat tissue, and you could tell that as a dietitian by measuring their body fat levels. Say they're a vegan, maybe their calcium intake is low, they have more released calcium from the bone. That lets their calcium in the blood be good, but they probably have low bone density. So you can see how all 5 of these components make up the systems model, and it allows you to keep this framework for learning. When you're ever talking about food, you can put it over here in the food area. When you're ever talking about digestion, transportation, or metabolism, you can put it here in the middle. So anyways, you'll learn lots more, some 16 weeks worth in your intro nutrition class, but you can't take that class until you have bio and chem done. And I will ask you that on the test. So thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.